Good afternoon, everybody. This recording corresponds to ruminants' digestive system. So let me share with you my PowerPoint from our last slide, from my last recording. All right, so let's have a look at the ruminant digestive system. So which are the main species we are talking about is cattle, sheep, goat, deer, moose, and elk. So let's start, as we did with monogastric, let's start with the first region of the digestive system, which is the mouth. So one typical characteristics of ruminants is that they do not have upper incisors. So for this reason, you will see that cattle and sheep and the rest of ruminant present a hard dental pad on the upper jaw that they actually use in conjunction with the lower incisors to cut the grass. Okay, so remember we're talking mainly about herbivores. But they present very well developed and characteristic molar teeth that are prepared for grinding. Remember that one of the also main characteristics of ruminants is the fact that they are able to ferment and digest cellulose and hemicellulose. So we're talking about hard cell walls from the different plants, which are even also have silice as a component, which actually requires a very thorough grinding, which is not only achieved on the first phase of chewing, but it's also achieved during rumination. We will go through rumination in detail about this phenomenon, which is also characteristics or unique to ruminants. And so these molar teeth, they actually have a lot of lateral jaw movement. If you ever saw a cow or a ruminant chewing the cud, you will see this kind of lateral permanent movement of the jaws that contributes to the crushing of the cell plant walls. And in the case of sheep and goats, they're characterized by presenting very prehensible lips, which is a big difference with the cattle. Cattle do not have that property of being very much selective in terms of what type of grass or plants specifically talking they are going to be eating. So they have more mechanism that resembles a scythe. So they're cutting all the grass that actually they are able to get a mouthful, and with the tongue, which is very muscular and kind of quite a good size, cattle manage to actually involve this grass, surround it with the tongue, and cut it with incisors and the dental pad, the upper pad, and that's how they graze. So they are not, again, very selective in the type of grass they eat. So saliva, it's also an important component here. It is of continuous production in bovines. So if you ever look at a cow eating and grazing and even chewing the cud, you will see that they produce quite a large amount of saliva, which is fundamental to lubricate the feed. And of course, it's going to be more copious, more abundant during eating and ruminating. It is estimated, and I think it's quite an impressive volume, if you think about it, that a normal cow will produce per day between 100 to 150 liters. Saliva contains a lot of recycled nutrients that are important for microorganisms, and this is something really important about the saliva and salivation of ruminants, because the abundant production of saliva allows them to recycle a lot of nitrogen as urea, phosphorus, and sodium. And this is really important as well. Saliva in cattle is highly buffered, mainly carbonate-based buffer. And remember, a buffer is a substance that actually is very resistant to, or contributes to the resistance for fluctuation of drastic changes in pH. So salivation in cattle is really important to avoid one problem we have, a digestive problem we have that actually ends up being a metabolic problem and that can even kill a lot of cattle, which is acidosis, sometimes caused by grain overload. So when we have this explosive, we can say, digestion of starch from grains, that actually produces a lot of acetic acid, which will lower the pH of a rumen down to less than 5, sometimes even as low as 2 to 3, which actually is pretty much the pH we will find in the stomach of a monogastric. And that will cause a lot of problems. A lot of bacteria will be killed, freeing toxins from this microbial death that will go through the walls of the rumen and produce a massive acidosis problem. So, and what actually causes, what is a stimulus to salivation? It is forage. It is fiber in the diet of a ruminant. So that's why it's so important that whenever we formulate a diet, always have in mind that we need to supply fiber, either as a hay bale or straw, but fiber must always be present in the feed of ruminant. And one of the reasons for the importance of this ingredient in a cattle diet is because it stimulates production of saliva, and that saliva will contribute first to recycling all these nutrients we talk about, important like nitrogen for the micro, but also it is important because actually it is highly buffered and will contribute to keep the pH constant in the rumen. So the digestive anatomy of a bovine is formed by the esophagus, followed by the reticulum, the rumen with two main sacs, the dorsal sac and the ventral sac, followed by the omasum, and continue by the abomasum or glandular stomach, and finally the small intestine, large intestine, and the rectum. So here we have an diagram. Again, the esophagus, the reticulum, which is normally where the heavy objects ingested by the animal and the large particles of forage or feed will end up landing. And then we have the rumen, which is the larger sac, again, and which is sometimes divided into a dorsal sac and a ventral sac, and then followed by the omasum, the abomasum, or sometimes called the true stomach, because it's what we refer as the glandular stomach, where it resembles pretty much the stomach of a monogastric, and then it is continued by the small intestine and the large intestine. So this is the rumen. Let's start with the rumen. That's a picture of magnified of the papilla of the rumen. So the rumen is actually completely lined with an epithelium that has papillas, which of course contributes to enlarge the absorption surface of the rumen. And remember, it is through these papilla, this ruminal wall, that the volatile fatty acids are going to be absorbed, as well as ammonia. It is normally, rumen is located in the left side of the body. And why is this important? You will see when we talk about some problems with excess of gas production, that we will see that there is the flank, it is the left side that is actually swollen in the animal, and that actually allows us to make a diagnosis of what a problem is. It is a large fermentation vat, and one of the consequences of this high fermentation process taking place in the rumen, it is the production of a lot of heat, and of course this contributes to bovine having such a low upper critical temperature. That means that at not that high temperatures, the animals start being under thermal stress, and of course need to dissipate that heat at the same time is what allows cattle to produce so well sometimes in cold climates. So it is in the rumen where that actually fulfill a series of roles. First of all, storage. So of course the ruminants are grazers, so that means that they actually eat a lot of high volume of grass, if you think about it. So they need a big, huge stomach to actually contain all that volume of forage. It is a place where the plants are going to be soaked in the fluid, in the ruminal fluid, And of course, there is a physical mixing, which is mainly done by the contraction of a reticulum and of the rumen, which is the rumen has a cyclic contraction, muscular contraction pattern, which is important for digestion. And also rumen contributes with providing an ideal environment for the microbes. So it will actually supply with moisture. So that's when it gets soaked, all the plants and the feed. And of course, this high water content of a ruminal fluid is important for the microbes for fermentation process. It provides also a warm environment, and what is important for most of the microbes, ruminal microbes, it provides a low oxygen concentration media. We can say that it's mostly anaerobic, that it is what the actual bacteria normally, these bacteria actually need to grow and proliferate. And of course, to be able to digest a fiber that the animals eat. So we will find as microbes in the rumen bacteria, but also protozoa, which in general, but of course there are some bacteria that produce gas as well, but protozoa are the ones mostly in a great extent responsible for producing methane, and fungi as well. So this is a really nice picture, magnified as well, where you can see the bacteria and the protozoa and the starch granules. They are actually on the surface of this, probably a grain fraction or fragment of a grain, and you can see the bacteria and the protozoa on the surface. And this picture, and that's also the reason why I included here, is really important, because it is very graphic, because it shows you the importance of breaking down the feed into small particles. So that provides enough surface for bacteria and protozoa to attach to the feed, and of course be able to digest it. So they produce, of course, microbes will be developing a fermentation reaction of a feed. It is an environment characterized by being of low oxygen, anaerobic, and roughly to have an idea, of course, it varies a lot, but the concentration of microbes we will find in the ruminal fluid varies between 10 billion to 10 elevated to the 10th microbes per ml, right? And there are about 60 species that have been described in the ruminal fluid. And the species normally will change and will vary with the type of diet and with the pH that the rumen has. So again, when we talk about acidosis, that means the lowering of a pH of the rumen, normally most of the protozoa will die. Some bacteria will die and others will proliferate. In general, the good ones will die, and the ones that are not really very good for the animals will proliferate, like the ones that produce more acetic acid. So it will be a shift into the production of more acetic acid within the group of volatile fatty acid, which will kind of contribute to a much even lower pH with time. And also the control of the species is important, sometimes for preventing bloat or the excess of gas production in the rumen that can actually sometimes be, the animal can have difficulty or problem to eliminate all this gas by erection. And this is done by some compounds called monensin, for example, which is an iron that is used for the control of that and to lower the production of gas. Polysaccharides are the ones that will be easily fermented, mainly the starch, and will be easily and very fast fermented. But also the microbes will be ferment cellulose, and the plant walls will be able to digest that. Here is another diagram where you can see this in the picture at the bottom, the compartment. You have the rumen, the internal structure of each of the four stomach, the reticulum, which is characterized by having this kind of honeycomb pattern in the inside lining, followed by the omasum, which actually resembles kind of a book with all the pages, and the abomasum of glandular stomach. And I included this link for a short video on YouTube that I encourage you to watch it, which is very interesting and will help you illustrate that the anatomy and the physiology of the forestomach. So after the first compartment we will find after the esophagus is actually the reticulum, which again is characterized by being formed by this kind of honeycomb pattern, which resembles small compartment, which is important for grinding, but it's important also during the regurgitation process in the animal, assists the rumen in mixing activity, and provides an additional area for fermentation. And also it is the stomach, or sometimes called the first stomach, where the heavier objects ingested by the animal will fall, like metals and stones, and for example, wires. And I'll show you on a later slides about what problem can cause the ingestion of wire, which is not that unusual in cattle, especially when we are fixing fences and sometimes we throw small pieces of metal on the field, on the pasture. So remember again that cows and cattle are not very selective. So with this kind of surrounding movement of the tongue resemble a scythe, they actually cannot select what type of grass or even objects, sometimes even stones, they eat, and for this reason they end up causing a lot of problems to the animal. So that's a reticulum having this hardware, sometimes called the hardware stomach because of those heavier objects, especially metals, landing there, and this honeycomb pattern, and you have this three-dimensional design showing the shape and the position of the reticulum. And I'm going to refer quickly about one example of what consequences can have in the reticulum, and is related to the physiology and anatomy of a reticulum. We can see in that diagram how close from an anatomical point of view, cranial to the rumen, we find the reticulum, which is only separated from the heart in the thoracic cavity by the diaphragm. So when the animal actually eats some object that could be wires, as I mentioned before, when, for example, we are repairing fences or doing any kind of construction work, and that arrow with 2 points shows the actual type of contraction the reticulum go through. So they contract on a kind of anterior to posterior direction. And if the animal has a wire inside the reticulum, that contraction will actually help the wire to perforate the walls of the reticulums and also perforate the diaphragm and affect the pericardium. And sometimes, if we don't perform a surgery, actually kill the animal. And this is problem is called traumatic pericarditis, or inflammation of a pericardium. Normally the heart, the pericardium collects a lot of fluid surrounding the heart, and there's a lot of pain present in the animal, which actually they present a lot of edema as well due to the cardiac insufficiency. So there you can see a picture of a wire that has punctured the reticulum wall, and that actually illustrates what I was talking about due to this. That's another picture where you can see a wire actually embedded into the reticulum wall, and that's actually shows you the danger of leaving small pieces of wire on the ground. And how can we solve this problem? Well, there is a very smart solution for that, which is actually using a bolus gun, forcing the animal to ingest a magnet with the shape of a bolus, and then all the small pieces of wire which could potentially produce or perforate the walls of the reticulum will stick to the magnet, and that will prevent any further problem. And of course, the magnet will be inside the reticulum for the whole life of the animal, but it doesn't interfere with any digestive process, and of course will prevent a lot of death. So those are other pictures of magnet with pieces of wire that were found inside the animals at slaughter. The third compartment is the omasum. Contains many folds and actually looks like a book. All the one fold after the other, actually they look like pages on a book. And although it is very interesting to to say here that although a lot of research has been done, it's not very clear what is the specific function or role of the omasum in the digestive system. It seems that it doesn't contribute that much to the whole digestive function, with the exception of water reabsorption, and that's the main role that has always been indicated or typified to the omasum. The folds also, it has been suggested that can produce some grinding action of the feed and contribute to the digestive process. The omasum, there you have the presence of many plies. That's typical pattern of the anatomy of the omasum, or the internal anatomy of omasum. And it's located at the right side of a rumen and reticulum. And again, it has been suggested that its main functional role in the digestive process in cattle is for water and volatile fatty acids absorption. So there you can see the different plies that are characteristics of this stomach. And finally, we have the abomasum, sometimes called the true stomach, because it is a glandular stomach and produces the same enzymes and chemical compounds that we will find in a monogastric. Of course, it will actually digest all the microbes that are being passed through the rumen, and of course those nutrients and food particles that were not subject to fermentation, they'll be digested in the stomach, in the abomasum. It is located at the right side of a rumen and actually correspond to the simple stomach of the monogastric and perform a similar monogastric digestive function, with the production, as we saw in monogastric, of pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid. And here it is something, a big physiological and important difference between the lactating calves and the adult ruminant. And the calves actually have what we call the esophageal groove, which is a kind of an internal canal that is created when the animal is stimulated by the ingestion of milk, when we provide milk through a bottle, or when the animal is actually suckling its mother, when suckling the teat of a mother. So this canal will be formed by folding inside the digestive tract of the ruminant, in this case the calf. And actually what it will do is a very important role, because it will deviate the milk directly to the abomasum. So from the esophagus, it will go just right to the abomasum, bypassing the rumen, the reticulum, and the omasum. So why is that important? Well, think about a lactating animal has not yet developed a microbial population in the rumen. So if milk by accident landed on any of the other compartments, it will be it will become rancid. It will produce a lot of digestive problems to the ruminant. So for this reason, because the animal is not really prepared to ferment any feed at that really young age, the importance of the esophageal groove is key for avoiding any digestive problem. And because as a concept, we can say that the actual lactating animal, the calf, the young animal, actually has a digestive system that actually resembles very much the one of monogastric. So this is a picture of the true stomach of abomasum. You can see that also has some plies, but they are smooth, and you can see them shining. I don't know if you can actually appreciate that in this slide, but I can see it. You can see that it's a little bit more shining surface because of the mucus, remember, mainly produced by the cells in the pyloric region of the true stomach that protect this mucus. This secretion actually protects the lining of the stomach from the chlorhydric acid and pepsinogen. And that's a diagram actually showing you the esophageal groove. So you can see on the arrow the calf suckling from the bucket, and with the arrow how it goes directly to the abomasum, avoiding the other compartments. The picture in the middle is really nice picture. I got it a few years ago and I still have it, because it's one of the best I saw that actually shows how the esophageal groove looks like, and the arrows actually point towards the omasum. And you can see on the other diagram the evolution of the digestive tract of a calf on the first week, where we have a big abomasum and a still very incipient reticulum omasum and rumen. But as the animal ages, 3 to 4 months, getting closer to weaning time, we can see that the rumen has increased in size quite a lot. And finally, at maturity, we have a huge rumen and, of course, a much smaller, relatively speaking, abomasum and a bigger omasum and reticulum. So the other concept which is important here, it has been shown through different experiments and trials, that if we prolong the liquid diet, as we call the milk, providing milk for the calf for a longer period of time, and the rumen will delay its development, of course, because the abomasum is becoming the most important organ then. But of course, at some point it will start developing because the animals start ingesting microbes from the environment and they start populating the rumen. And if we force on the other side, if we start forcing or stimulating the young calf to start eating roughage, plants, and high content diet, then they will start developing the rumen faster. So that's actually a way when sometimes when we are interested in performing what we call an early weaning, sometimes we do it as a reproductive tool to bypass the anistrus situation in cattle, but I don't want to sidetrack with that. But sometimes we can actually stimulate the formation or the population of the rumen as soon as possible by creep feeding, which is a differential feeding of the calf in relation to the mother. So we start lowering the milk in the diet. We start providing highly digestible solid food. So normally high protein feed. So the calf will start getting more towards that diet, solid diet, and start eating less or drinking, less milk from the mother or from the milk substitute we provide. This diagram also shows the evolution of the 4 stomachs of the calf, mainly related to the abomasum and the 3 other stomachs. So we can see that from birth to 2 weeks of age, the abomasum represents 70% of the stomach capacity, while the other 3 compartments, rumen, reticulum, and omasum, only represent 30%. By 8 weeks, it's 50-50. And between 3 to 4 months, again, is normally the age we will actually wean. The calf, by wean, we mean we stop providing milk and just provide solid. Normally, this occurs naturally in natural conditions because the milk production of the mother starts going down. So the animals start eating more and more solid feed. So that's at 3 to 4 months, the abomasum has gone down and represent only 25% of stomach capacity, while the other compartments have increased their capacity up to 75%. And finally, on a mature animal, mature steer or cow or bull, in percentage, the abomasum will represent less than 10% of that stomach capacity, while the rest of the compartment will represent more than 90%. This is again another diagram showing the evolution of the 4 stomach or the stomach of a calf until it becomes a mature adult cow. And I included this diagram because it's good, because it's actually showing in proportion the different compartments. So the rumen, again, it is the largest stomach in adult ruminants. It is, as we said, a fermentation vat where we will find the bacteria and the protozoas breaking down the roughages for digestion. And one not small detail here, remember when we talk about vitamin and the B complex vitamin, we said that normally in cattle, we only need to provide cobalt and not cobalamin, which is the actual B12 vitamin, just as an example with B12, because the microbes were able to synthesize vitamin B. So that will be within the rumen, the site where vitamin B or complex of vitamins will be synthesized and produced by the microbes. And also the microbes, remember, have the capacity to synthesize their own amino acids and protein using non-protein nitrogen like urea. And of course, they will actually, the microbes themselves will be used by the animal, by the host, as a feed to digest. Okay, they will be digested in the small intestine, and they will of course release their protein and their carbohydrates. And one concept, I don't know if we talk about this, but normally microbial protein is of very high biological value. It's highly digested, and it's really has a lot of essential amino acids, and it's really important and of good quality. The intestine of the ruminant, normally they present a small intestine that it doesn't vary much from a small intestine from a monogastric animal. And the large intestine present a fairly large cecum and colon. So it's not only the rumen, but the cecum and the colon of ruminants is also quite big in general, where some fermentation process also takes place in the cecum and colon. So don't forget, it's not only the rumen, but also the cecum and colon. So one thing I'm gonna talk a little bit here as well is about rumination and eructation, which are those processes that take place within the digestive system and are characteristic of ruminants. Rumination, or also sometimes called regurgitation, it is defined, I don't like this term to be honest, but it's very graphic. It's actually kind of controlled vomiting. So the animal is able to collect the ruminal content back to the mouth, where the animal will keep on chewing those boluses, that ruminal content, which is of course mainly formed by gross, roughage, and water, and it will provide the opportunity for the animal to remasticate, to rechew all these pieces of grass, keep on with the grinding process and increasing the surface of attack for the microbes to be able to digest all that cellulose and hemicellulose. And also it will stimulate the production, remember we talk about this, of saliva during the rumination process, and that will contribute recycling some component like nitrogen, phosphorus, and sodium we talked about before in the slides, and also will be important for providing a good buffering capacity, controlling the pH inside the room and avoiding any acidosis problem. What will be absorbed is water. Water will be re-swallowed, so will be recovered from the boluses, and then the animal will chew it. And it is estimated, and of course this changes a lot about the ruminant we consider, but mostly depends a lot on the diet, but it's roughly estimated that a cow will spend about 8 hours a day ruminating, doing this process. And my experience tells me that normally when you see cattle or ruminant ruminating, means that he's fine. Normally it's a good reflection of a good status in general. And this process, it is theorized that it has been acquired through evolution, because there is the theory that actually ruminants developed the rumen, the 4 compartments, and the capacity to ruminate their feed. So that allowed them to graze very quickly in the valleys and run to the high of the hills, and that was a way of getting away from the predators. So that will be grazing fast, and then they will go back to the high places to keep on with the ruminating process in a more quiet way and away from the predators that were more living in the lowlands. The other process that's typical of ruminants is the eructation, which is the elimination of gas. Fermentation produces a lot of gas, mainly methane and CO2 or carbon dioxide. And if for some reason the gas cannot be eliminated from the rumen, it will cause a pathological problem called bloat. And the bloat will have 2 main causes. One is the mechanical obstruction. Sometimes happens when the cows eat potatoes, huge intact potatoes, not sliced, or turnips, small turnips, or sweet potatoes. So they get stuck in the esophagus. So that, of course, will produce a blockage. So the animal is not able to eliminate the gas. So they start getting bloated, and we will see that we will see a characteristic swelling area on the left flank. Remember always, paralumbar fossa, left paralumbar fossa. And the other cause of producing bloating, which has a lot of implications for production, is what we call the frothy bloat, which looks more like foam, is sometimes called foamy bloat. And this is because the animal is ingesting a lot of legumes, and some legumes, especially alfalfa, they have a lot of saponins, which are kind of substance that actually have, chemically they are similar to soap. And what they do is they, instead of producing a big bubble of gas, which is not easy to break for the cow and eliminate that gas, and these saponin, actually, they are highly tensioactive substances. So what they produce is really, really tiny and small bubbles of gas instead of a big bubble. And of course, the animal is not able to break those tiny bubbles because they are really, really small. And they produce kind of similar to foam. So he's not able to initiate the eruption process. So they start getting bloated. And that's actually a nice diagram I found that actually shows you in the arrows in red, the regurgitation process, where the feed from the ruminal content and the reticulum content is actually re-ejected to the mouth. The animal chews it and is returned and swallowed back to the ruminant. And that's how the whole digestive process and mastication process, rumination process occurs in cattle. This is the situation of bloat. Look, if you see at the picture, you will see on the left flank, the swollen flank. This is produced by the accumulation of gas. For some reason, the animal is not being able to eliminate it. And of course, it will be on the left side, not the right side. The cecum in the horse, remember, is on the right side. So here you have a diagram showing you, of course, the rumen is not always in its whole capacity full with roughage. There is a kind of a space, upper space, of course, where the gas will be located. And one of the things we can do to control that, well, we can actually puncture. Sometimes there is a trocar we normally use. We will puncture the left paralumbar fossa and eliminate the gas. So that will allow the gas to go until we solve the problem of the esophagus, for example, blockage. And we can also administer medicine through the trocar inside the ruminal cavity and disperse the small bubbles formed by the saponins of the clovers or alfalfa or whatever grass, high saponin content grass the animal were grazing. So that's a picture of the type of clover that will be kind of dangerous to graze. So how can we solve that problem as well through management? Well, one of the things can be actually diminish the size of a grazing piece, or the grazing stripe the animals are actually grazing. They are using in the artificial pasture or the alfalfa. So what are we doing there? We are forcing the cows to eat not only the leaves, not only chopping the top of the grass, but also going down to the soil, we can say, to the land. So we will be forcing them to eat as well the stems, which have lower saponin content. And of course, we are limiting the amount of legumes the animal is eating per day, and that's a way of controlling the production of gas. And the other thing is grazing previously to lower the height of the legumes, and trying to control the volume of the legume. Normally we can graze them with sheep before putting our cattle in the artificial pasture like clover or alfalfa, because sheep are less susceptible to developing bloat. So finally, as a roundup, the 4 steps of feed utilization are digestion, the absorption, the circulation, and the metabolism. So in our next lecture, we'll be talking about the whole process, this process. Thank you very much for your attention.